Kemi thought she was an only child for 40 years. Then a message arrived. "Hi, sister. We need to talk." That message led to the most incredible family reunion in history. The sender was Maria from Spain, and she had tracked Kemi down through a DNA database. She wasn't just reaching out to her. She had found 10 others, all scattered across the globe. From Tokyo to Toronto, from Lagos to London, their father had left a trail of children, each raised believing they were special, each told they were the only one. But Maria had done what their father never could. She had brought them all together. And what they discovered about why he had kept them apart would challenge everything they believed about love, family, and the lengths a parent will go to protect their children. In the bustling heart of Lagos, Nigeria, where the sounds of traffic horns blend with the calls of street vendors, lived Kemi Adebayo, a successful software engineer who had built her life on the foundation of being her father's only child. At 40 years old, she had established herself in the tech industry, created a comfortable life in her modern apartment in Victoria Island, and maintained the close-knit family traditions that her late father, Adunni Adebayo, had instilled in her. Kemi remembered her father as a devoted businessman who traveled extensively for his import-export company. He would disappear for weeks at a time, always returning with stories of distant lands, exotic gifts, and a renewed appreciation for home. "You are my greatest treasure, Kemi," he would say, pulling her close after each return. "You and your mother are all I need in this world." Those words had shaped her identity, making her feel special, chosen, and deeply loved. Her mother, Folik, had passed away 3 years earlier, leaving Kemi with cherished memories and a strong sense of family legacy. She had grown up hearing stories of her parents' love story, how Adunni had swept Folake off her feet with his charm and ambition, and how Kemi was the blessed fruit of their union. It was a narrative that had given her confidence and purpose throughout her life. On this particular Thursday evening, as the Lagos sun painted the sky in brilliant oranges and purples, Kemi sat in her living room, laptop open, finishing up some code for a client project. The familiar sounds of her neighborhood, children playing football in the compound, mothers calling them home for dinner, and the distant sound of Afrobeat music from someone's radio, created the soundtrack of her daily life. Her phone buzzed with a notification from her email. Expecting another work request or perhaps a message from a friend, Kemi glanced at the screen. The subject line made her pause. "We need to talk. Your sister Maria." "Sister?" Kemi frowned, thinking it must be spam or some kind of mistake. She had no sister. Her parents had been very clear about that. She was their only child, their precious daughter who had been enough to complete their family. But curiosity got the better of her, and she opened the email. "Dear Kemi," it began. "I know this will come as a shock, but my name is Maria Rodriguez, and I believe we share the same father, Adunni Adebayo. I'm writing to you from Madrid, Spain, where I've lived my entire life with my mother, Carmen. Like you, I grew up believing I was my father's only child until I decided to take a DNA test for health reasons. The results led me to discover something extraordinary. I'm not alone, and neither are you." Kemi's heart began to race. This had to be some elaborate scam, or a case of mistaken identity. Her father, the man who had showered her with attention and love, the man who had called her his only precious daughter countless times, couldn't possibly have another child. It was impossible. But Maria's email continued with details that made Kemi's blood run cold. She described Adunni perfectly: his height, his distinctive laugh, the small scar above his left eyebrow from a childhood accident, and even his habit of humming traditional Yoruba songs when he was happy. She attached a photograph of herself with a man who was unmistakably Kemi's father, though he looked younger in the picture. "I understand if you don't believe me," Maria wrote. "I wouldn't have believed it myself if I hadn't seen the DNA results. But Kemi, there's more. Through genetic matching and careful research, I've discovered that we have 10 other siblings. Yes, you read that correctly. 12 of us in total, scattered across the world. I've managed to contact most of them, and we're all dealing with the same shock and confusion you're probably feeling right now. Stop for a second and imagine this. You're 40 years old and suddenly discover you have 12 siblings around the world. How would you react? Would you be angry, excited, or completely overwhelmed? Tell me in the comments what you think you'd do, because Kemi's reaction to this discovery might surprise you. Maria's email included a list of names and locations that read like a geography lesson. Yuki from Tokyo, Japan; Hans from Berlin, Germany; Priya from Mumbai, India; João from São Paulo, Brazil; Emma from London, England; Chen from Shanghai, China; Amara from Nairobi, Kenya; Olaf from Oslo, Norway; Camila from Mexico City, Mexico; Dmitry from Moscow, Russia; and Sarah from Toronto, Canada. Each name was accompanied by a brief description and a photograph. As Kemi scrolled through the images, she felt her world shifting beneath her feet. There were undeniable family resemblances, the same deep-set eyes she saw in the mirror every morning, similar bone structure, and in some cases, the same distinctive smile that she had inherited from their father. Kemi sat back in her chair, her mind reeling. If this was true, it meant that her entire understanding of her family, her identity, and her father's life had been built on a lie. The man she had idolized, the father she had thought was devoted solely to her and her mother, had been living multiple lives across the globe. She read the email 3 more times, each reading making the reality sink in deeper. Maria had included her phone number and suggested a video call to discuss the situation further. She also mentioned that she had been in contact with most of the other siblings and that they were planning to arrange a meeting. "I know this is overwhelming," Maria's email concluded. "It has been for all of us. But I believe we deserve to know the truth about our father and why he chose to keep us all separate. If you're willing, I'd like to organize a reunion where we can all meet, share our stories, and try to understand what Adunni was thinking. You don't have to decide right away, but please know that you have 11 siblings who would very much like to meet you." Kemi closed her laptop and walked to the window overlooking the Lagos Lagoon. The city lights were beginning to twinkle as evening settled in, but she barely noticed the familiar view. Her mind was spinning with questions. How was it possible that her father had maintained relationships with women in 12 different countries? When had he found the time? How had he managed to keep each relationship secret from the others? She thought back to his frequent business trips, the weeks he would spend away from home. He had always claimed to be building his import-export business, establishing connections across Africa and beyond. Could those trips have been visits to his other families? The thought made her feel sick. But there was something else nagging at her. If Maria was telling the truth, why had their father gone to such extraordinary lengths to keep them all separated? Most men who had multiple families didn't scatter them across continents. There had to be a reason, something more complex than simple infidelity or irresponsibility. Kemi picked up her phone and stared at Maria's number. Part of her wanted to delete the email and pretend this conversation had never happened. Life had been simpler when she thought she was an only child, when her father's memory was untarnished by this revelation. But a stronger part of her needed to know the truth. She dialed the international number. "Hola?" came a voice that sounded remarkably similar to her own. "Is this Maria?" Kemi asked, her voice barely above a whisper. "Kemi? Oh my God, you called. I wasn't sure if you would believe me." For the next 3 hours, Kemi listened as Maria shared her story. She had grown up in Madrid with her mother, Carmen, a Spanish artist who had met Adunni during one of his business trips to Europe in the 1980s. Like Kemi's mother, Carmen had believed she was Adunni's only love, the woman he returned to whenever his business obligations allowed. Maria described a childhood remarkably similar to Kemi's, a father who was absent for long periods but incredibly loving and attentive when present. He had supported her education, celebrated her achievements, and made her feel like the center of his universe during his visits. Carmen had passed away 2 years earlier, taking her secrets to the grave, just as Folake had done. "The strangest part," Maria explained, "is that our father gave each of our mothers almost identical gifts over the years. Golden jewelry with traditional African symbols, handcrafted wooden sculptures, even the same type of perfume. It's like he had a system, a way of maintaining consistency across all his relationships." As they talked, Kemi began to see patterns that she had never noticed before. Her father's gifts, his stories, even some of his phrases seemed to follow a script. Had everything about their relationship been calculated? Maria had already spoken with most of their siblings, and their stories were remarkably consistent. Each had grown up believing they were special, the sole focus of Adunni's love and attention. Each had mothers who spoke of him with deep affection and unwavering loyalty, and each had been left with questions when he died 5 years earlier in what they all believed was a car accident in Nigeria. "But here's the thing that really troubles me," Maria said. "I've been researching our father's business dealings, and I can't find any record of an import-export company under his name. His financial records show regular transfers to accounts in all our countries, but no clear source of income. Where was he getting the money to support all of us?" This revelation hit Kemi like a physical blow. She had always assumed her father was successful in business, given the comfortable lifestyle he had provided for her and her mother. But if Maria was right, then his source of income was as mysterious as his multiple families. Over the following weeks, Kemi found herself drawn into a complex web of international phone calls, video chats, and email exchanges with her newfound siblings. Each conversation revealed new layers to their father's elaborate deception and raised more questions about his motivations. Yuki, the sibling from Tokyo, was a quiet systems analyst who spoke with precision about their father's visits to Japan. She had noticed that he always arrived with detailed knowledge of local customs and current events, as if he had been studying Japanese culture intensively. Hans from Berlin was a professor of linguistics who had begun analyzing their father's speech patterns and realized that Adunni had developed different accents and mannerisms for each of his families. Priya, a doctor from Mumbai, brought a medical perspective to their discussions. She had started researching genetic disorders and inherited conditions, wondering if there was a health-related reason for their father's behavior. João, an artist from São Paulo, had kept detailed journals about his father's visits and was shocked to discover that Adunni had told him many of the same inspirational stories he had shared with his other children. Emma from London worked in international finance and had begun investigating their father's money trail. She discovered a complex network of offshore accounts and shell companies that suggested their father had been involved in something far more sophisticated than import-export. Chen from Shanghai was a technology expert who had started cross-referencing their father's travel patterns with international business records and found several troubling inconsistencies. Amara from Nairobi, their African sibling, brought a different perspective to the group. She understood the cultural context of their father's homeland better than the others, and suggested that his behavior might have roots in traditional African practices or beliefs. Olaf from Oslo, a psychologist, theorized that their father might have suffered from a complex personality disorder that drove him to create and maintain multiple identities. Camila from Mexico City was a journalist who had begun treating their family mystery like an investigative story, gathering documents and conducting research with professional rigor. Dmitri from Moscow worked in intelligence and had access to international databases that might help uncover their father's true activities. Sarah from Toronto was a lawyer who was concerned about the legal implications of their discoveries and the potential impact on their respective inheritances. As the weeks passed, a disturbing picture began to emerge. Their father hadn't simply been a man with multiple families. He had been running what appeared to be a sophisticated international operation that required him to maintain separate identities in different countries. The question that haunted all of them was whether they had been pawns in some larger scheme, or simply the unintended consequences of their father's secret life. Maria proposed that they all meet in person to combine their research and try to uncover the truth. After lengthy discussions about logistics and safety, they agreed to gather in Lagos, Nigeria, their father's homeland, and Kemi's current residence. It seemed fitting that they should seek answers in the place where Adunni's story had begun. The reunion was scheduled for a weekend in December during the Harmattan season, when the weather in Lagos would be more pleasant for their international visitors. Kemi arranged for them to stay in a private compound in Lekki, away from the crowds and chaos of central Lagos, where they could have privacy for their sensitive discussions. As the date approached, Kemi felt a mixture of excitement and terror. She was about to meet 11 people who shared her blood, but were complete strangers, and together they would confront truths about their father that might be more disturbing than any of them were prepared to handle. The week before the reunion, Kemi received a phone call that changed everything. It was from an elderly man who introduced himself as Pastor Gabriel Okafor, claiming to have been her father's closest friend and confidant. I heard through mutual friends that Adunni's children have been asking questions, Pastor Okafor said in heavily accented English. I think it's time you learned the truth about your father, but it's not a story that can be told over the phone. When your siblings arrive in Lagos, bring them to my church in Ikeja. What I have to tell you will explain everything, but it will also change how you see your father forever. Pastor Okafor wouldn't elaborate further, insisting that the full story required all of them to be present. He did, however, offer one cryptic warning. Your father was not the man any of you think he was, but he was also not the villain you might be imagining. The truth is far more complex, and it involves all of you in ways you cannot yet understand. The night before her siblings were scheduled to arrive, Kemi sat in her father's old study, surrounded by his books, photographs, and business documents. She had searched through everything multiple times over the past few months, looking for clues to his secret life, but had found nothing definitive. Now, with Pastor Okafor's promise of revelation looming, she wondered if she really wanted to know the truth. She picked up a framed photograph of herself with her parents from her university graduation day. In the picture, her father's arm was around her shoulders, his face beaming with pride. Her mother stood on her other side, elegant and smiling. They looked like a perfect, complete family. Had it all been a lie? Or had there been genuine love beneath the deception? Tomorrow she would meet her siblings for the first time. Together they would confront the mystery of Adunni Adebayo and discover why a man who could have been content with any one of his families had instead chosen to create and maintain 12 separate lives across the globe. The answers they found might bring them closer together as a family, or they might destroy the loving memories each of them held of their father. As Kemi prepared for bed that night, she had no idea that Pastor Okafor's revelation would not only explain their father's extraordinary deception, but would also reveal a legacy that connected all 12 siblings in ways that would challenge their understanding of fate, destiny, and the true meaning of family. The man they had known as their father had been keeping a secret that spanned generations, and his children were about to discover that they were inheritors of something far more significant than his love. They were the carriers of a responsibility that would define the rest of their lives. The morning of the reunion dawned clear and bright, with the harmattan winds bringing an unusual coolness to Lagos. Kemi had barely slept, her mind racing with anticipation and anxiety. She had arranged for drivers to collect her siblings from Murtala Muhammad International Airport throughout the day, as they arrived on flights from around the world. The first to arrive was Amara from Nairobi, whose flight had been the shortest. As Kemi watched a tall, elegant woman with striking cheekbones and the same deep-set eyes she saw in her own mirror walk through the arrival gate, she felt a surge of emotion that surprised her. This stranger was her sister, connected to her by blood and by the shared experience of Adunni's love and deception. "Kemi?" Amara asked tentatively as they approached each other. "Yes, Amara." They embraced awkwardly at first, but then more warmly as the reality of their connection hit them both. As they rode through the chaotic Lagos traffic toward Lekki, Amara shared her first impressions of Nigeria and her nervousness about meeting the others. "I keep wondering what he would think of this," Amara said, looking out at the bustling streets. Would he be proud that we found each other, or horrified that his secret is out? Throughout the day, the others arrived in pairs and small groups. Maria came with Hans, having coordinated their flights to arrive together. Yuki and Chen had traveled together from Asia, while Priya arrived alone, but was immediately welcomed into the growing group. Emma and Dmitri had shared a connection through Moscow, while João, Camila, Olaf, and Sarah had managed to coordinate their transatlantic flights. By evening, all 12 siblings were gathered in the beautiful compound Kemi had arranged, sitting around a large table under the stars. The introductions had been emotional, with many tears and nervous laughter as they compared features, mannerisms, and shared memories of their father. Despite their different cultures, languages, and backgrounds, the family resemblances were undeniable, and their similar experiences with Adunni created an immediate bond. "I can't believe he managed to keep us all secret from each other for so long," Emma said, shaking her head in amazement. "The logistics alone must have been incredible." "That's what troubles me the most," replied Dmitri, his voice carrying the serious tone of his intelligence background. "This level of operational security suggests military or intelligence training. Our father wasn't just a businessman with multiple families. He was someone with very specialized skills." Chen nodded in agreement. "I've been analyzing the travel patterns Maria compiled, and they're too precise to be random. He visited each of us on carefully calculated schedules, always arriving with locally appropriate gifts and cultural knowledge. This required extensive planning and resources." As they talked late into the night, sharing stories and comparing notes, a picture emerged of their father as a man of extraordinary discipline and dedication, but also of profound secrecy. Each sibling had memories of him being fully present and engaged during his visits, never seeming rushed or distracted by other obligations. He had given each of them the feeling of being his entire world during those precious weeks together. "The question that haunts me," said Priya, "is whether we were his greatest joy or his greatest burden. Did he create these multiple families because he loved us so much that he wanted to experience that love 12 times over? Or were we the result of something else entirely?" Kemi had been largely quiet during these exchanges, still processing the surreal experience of being surrounded by siblings she had never known existed. Finally, she spoke up. "Tomorrow, we're going to meet Pastor Okafor, the man who says he knew our father's true story. Whatever we learn, I want us to remember that each of us experienced real love from him. Whatever his motivations were, whatever secrets he was keeping, the affection he showed us was genuine. I could feel it in every hug, every story he told, every gift he brought." The others murmured their agreement. Despite their confusion and hurt over the deception, each of them retained deep love and respect for the man who had shaped their childhoods with his presence and absence. The next morning, they traveled together to Pastor Okafor's church in Ikeja, a modest building in one of Lagos's bustling commercial districts. The elderly pastor met them at the entrance, his weathered face creased with emotion as he looked at the group of young adults before him. "You all look so much like him," he said softly. "And like your mothers, from what I remember. Come inside. What I have to tell you will take some time, and you may want to sit down for this." Inside the simple church, they arranged themselves in the wooden pews, while Pastor Okafor stood at the altar, gathering his thoughts. When he began to speak, his voice was strong despite his advanced age. Your father's real name was not Adunni Adebayo, though he was born in this country. He was born Adunni Okoye in 1945, in a small village in what is now Imo State. What none of you know is that your father was not just a businessman. He was one of Nigeria's most valuable intelligence assets during some of the most dangerous years of our nation's history. The siblings exchanged glances, this revelation beginning to explain the sophisticated nature of their father's deception. In the 1970s and 1980s, during the Cold War, Nigeria was a strategic prize for both Western and Eastern intelligence services. Your father was recruited by the Nigerian Intelligence Agency, while he was still a university student because of his exceptional linguistic abilities and his talent for adopting different cultural personas. He was trained to operate as a deep-cover agent in multiple countries simultaneously. Pastor Okafor paused, allowing this information to sink in before continuing. His assignment was to establish credible identities in 12 key cities around the world, maintaining them for decades if necessary, in preparation for potential intelligence operations. To make these identities believable, he was instructed to create genuine emotional connections in each location. The agency believed that a man with real families would be less likely to be suspected as a spy and more likely to maintain his cover over the long term. The church fell silent as the implications of this revelation hit them. Their father hadn't simply been unfaithful or irresponsible. He had been following orders, creating them as part of an intelligence operation. But here's what the agency didn't anticipate. Pastor Okafor continued, his voice growing warmer. Your father fell genuinely in love with each of your mothers, and he loved each of you children with all his heart. What started as a professional assignment became the greatest joy and the greatest torture of his life. He was living 12 different lives, but each of them felt completely real to him. Camilla, the journalist, raised her hand. Why didn't he ever tell us? When the Cold War ended, why didn't he come clean? Pastor Okafor's expression grew sad. Because by then it was too late. The operation had taken on a life of its own. Your father discovered that some of the intelligence he had gathered over the years was being used for purposes he didn't agree with. He tried to extract himself from the agency, but they refused to let him go. They threatened to expose his multiple identities to all of his families if he didn't continue his work. So he was trapped, said Hans, understanding beginning to dawn in his voice. More than trapped. He was being blackmailed by his own government to continue a life that was tearing him apart. The man you knew as your loving father was carrying the weight of 12 separate identities, 12 families he loved but could never fully belong to, and the knowledge that his life's work had been corrupted by people who cared nothing for the families he had created. Pastor Okafor reached into his jacket and pulled out a thick envelope. Before he died, your father gave me this letter, with instructions to give it to his children if they ever found each other. He always hoped they would, even though he could never bring them together himself. With trembling hands, Kemi accepted the envelope. Inside was a handwritten letter in their father's familiar script, along with 12 smaller sealed envelopes, each marked with one of their names. The large letter explains everything in his own words, Pastor Okafor said. The individual letters contain something personal for each of you, along with information about a trust fund he established. Despite working for the government, your father was quite wealthy from legitimate investments he made over the years. He wanted to ensure that each of you would be financially secure, even if he couldn't be there to provide for you personally. Kemi opened the main letter with shaking hands and began to read aloud. My beloved children, if you are reading this letter, then you have accomplished something I could never do. You have found each other. I hope that Pastor Okafor has explained the circumstances that led to your unusual childhoods, and I pray that you can find it in your hearts to forgive an old man who loved too much and lived too little. Each of you was conceived in love, born in hope, and raised with the best of my intentions. Your mothers were extraordinary women who deserved better than the half-life I could offer them, but they gave me the greatest gifts imaginable. Each of you. You are not the products of deception, but the fruits of the deepest love I was capable of feeling. I know that learning about your siblings will be shocking and perhaps painful. You each grew up believing you were special, and you were, but not because you were my only child. You were special because each of you inherited different aspects of my heart and soul. Together, you represent everything I hoped to be and everything I failed to become. The money I've left you is not compensation for the lies you've discovered or payment for the father you deserved, but didn't receive. It's an investment in the family that I could never give you, but that you can give to each other. You have brothers and sisters around the world now. Use that gift wisely. I lived 12 different lives, but I died wishing I could have lived just one life with all of you together. That opportunity is yours now. Don't waste it on anger or resentment. Build the family I never could. Your father, in every sense that matters, Adunni. By the time Kemi finished reading, there wasn't a dry eye in the church. The siblings sat in stunned silence, processing the magnitude of what they had learned about their father's sacrifice and the impossible situation he had found himself in. Olaf, the psychologist, was the first to speak. He wasn't just our father. He was a man who loved so deeply that he couldn't choose between the families he had created, even when it destroyed him. And now we have a choice, added Sarah, her lawyer's mind already working through the implications. We can let his secrets divide us, or we can honor his memory by becoming the family he wanted us to be. Over the following days, as the siblings explored Lagos together and got to know each other, they made a decision that would have made their father proud. They established the Adunni Foundation, using the inheritance he had left them to create opportunities for children around the world who, like them, had grown up in complex family situations. They also committed to maintaining regular contact with each other, ensuring that their father's greatest wish, that his children would know and love each other, would finally be fulfilled. The reunion in Lagos marked not the end of their father's story, but the beginning of their own story as a truly united family. They had discovered that sometimes the greatest love comes wrapped in the most complicated circumstances, and that family is not just about the blood you share, but about the choice you make to love and support each other, despite the secrets and mistakes of the past. As they prepared to return to their respective countries, each carrying letters and gifts from their newly discovered siblings, They realized that their father's greatest legacy wasn't the money he had left them, or even the love he had shown them individually. It was the gift of each other. 12 remarkable people from around the world who now had the opportunity to build the kind of family that transcends borders, cultures, and even the complex motivations of the man who had brought them into existence. Their father had lived 12 separate lives, but his children would live one life together, honoring his memory by becoming the family he had always dreamed they could be.